guys, Alex Peak Performance Reviews. Welcome to another vlog and welcome to another PPR Tech Garage. Today's PPR Tech Garage is going to be on brakes. I'm going to give you the real basic or fairly basic fundamentals of a braking system, and I will go on to some slightly more advanced systems that you'll find on race cars and things like that and talk about those without going into too much detail. So, first and foremost, I'm going to give you the fundamental basics of how a brake system works. It's obviously a hydraulically assisted system. You obviously have a brake pedal. You push the brake pedal down and it forces the oil to increase pressure in the cylinders or the pistons that are in the calipers, and then it will squeeze the calipers. But basically, before that happens, you apply force with your foot on the brake pedal, and then the oil travels up into the brake servo. In America they call it the brake booster, I think. It's like a big drum. It's a cylindrical drum that basically sits on the back, but just before it then goes into the master cylinder, which is obviously where the reservoir sits, where you put your brake fluid. And then that goes and travels down to the brake lines and pipes into the parts of equipment that need to be used for braking. So the calipers, and like I say, the pistons are then forced and pressed upon, and the pressure increases, and dictated by the manufacturer's bias, the standard bias. Brake force is distributed between the fronts and the rears to adequately distribute the power and braking force to a specific size braking system on the front or the rear. Often front wheel drive cars have bigger brakes on the front and smaller brakes on the rear. Most cars do have that. Some cars will have a more bias to rear. More often than not, there's more brake force at the front of a car than on the rear, but the differential between the two can be different, and the bias can be different on rear-wheel drive cars and all-wheel drive cars, and they will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and dependent on sometimes even the size of the brakes and the tyres and all kinds. But there's a lot of setup in that from the manufacturer. If you end up changing brakes and you modify cars, it is quite important to try to adjust a bias or change the bias if you're doing a lot of things differently, because you can unsettle a car by over braking, overcompensating and over braking the front or the rear. So it's good to get a good balance, and that is why actually I use the EBC Apollo brake balance kit, or the balanced brake kit. They've thought about the whole kind of process of basically replacing the whole system. So anyway, on to different discs and pads, obviously depending on what you've got. Obviously these are some old pads that I've got, and they are tiny. These are an old rear setup for Fiesta ST. Like anything, you have to have a specific pad to a specific caliper setup and disc setup, and you'll have to obviously cross-reference part codes and numbers to make sure you put them on the right car, and you get the right parts and products. But like anything, if you increase the size of the pad, the disc and the caliper, and essentially the clamping pressure and contact patch, a bit like a tyre, the bigger typically the better, but it also comes down to the quality of the pad as well. So these are like a stock Tech OE pad, and obviously you can get upgraded pads that are probably more harder wearing. The ferrous materials that are used within this pad will be designed for a normal road car, and they will wear at a reasonable rate, specific to you using the car on the road. Even if you have to brake quite heavily, these will do the job. But obviously as you get to more extreme conditions and track conditions, you need a more extreme pad, and you can buy race pads. Again, if you do go to a race pad, you have to be careful, because sometimes race pads don't operate at low temperatures. So sometimes you'll be going for the brake and you'll just get what feels like brake fade. The car just won't bite at all, and you'll get no braking force. And eventually when the pads get a bit of heat in them, you'll start to get a bit of clamping force and feedback through the tyre. But yeah, obviously the key to getting a nice brake that you like is dictated by what you feel is right, based on modulation feel, so feel underneath your foot, but also what you're using the car for. So you really need to kind of look up and look at reviews and check out other people that have been using specific pads and try to use what you feel is going to be right for what you're going to use it for. We've got some EBC yellow stuff pads here as well. Again, OEM size or OE size, small, but going to do a much better job of braking the car better, quicker, stronger, and they'll operate from a good operating pressure or temperature, should I say, as well. So these will give great bite in street conditions, in cold conditions, but they will also stand up to a bit of track action as well if you need to. They're not a dedicated track pad, so you probably want to go a little bit more aggressive if you're always on track. But yellow stuff pads, especially the newly developed new stuff, is really getting quite good actually. So yeah, they're great. Moving on to a more aggressive pad, we've got an RP1 pad. EBC have just developed an even more aggressive pad, or actually I say more aggressive, an RP1 pad that also operates at a better lower colder temperature, so you can use it from a colder temperature as well, so it's more useful for when you're using an aggressive street pad that can also be a very aggressive track pad. So yeah, it's worth looking at the options you can get on the EBC racing website. They often have spidergrams to show you how the pad behaves, and there's also a lot of tech spec on their websites as well. But yeah, I do really rate and like the EBC stuff at the moment. So yeah, made in the UK as well, which is great for UK owners. Nice, typically keeps the cost down. Means we don't have to import them and whatnot. So yeah, it keeps the cost down, and yeah, it's nice to put money back into the UK economy as well. So yeah, I like that as well. So it's good. But yeah, EBC, check out their page and check out what they do. Some really awesome stuff. Going on to discs as well. Now, I haven't got a disc here, but obviously it's like a pad. With a disc, obviously the bigger the better to some extent. But obviously as you increase disc size, you can potentially increase mass, and that is going to be rotational mass that's put on a wheel, so unsprung weight just underneath the wheel, and because of it, you're increasing unsprung weight, it can sometimes affect handling and in general the weight of the car. So one of the clever things that have been designed recently on a lot of race cars and things like that, starting to find their way to OEM cars and OE cars, the new FK8 Civic Type R out of the factory has what I'm going to mention, a floating disc. What the floating disc is it's typically made up of two pieces. So rather than having one brake disc, brake rotor, you have a two-piece construction. So they're separated. They go onto the bell housing, which is the centre part, and then you just have these blanks, they call them, or rotors, blanks that just will go onto the middle assembly, the main assembly. And they're floating because they're just stuck on each side. But what they have as well, they have these little clips that allow almost like some movement as such. And what that does is it stops kickback, pad kickback. And if you've raced the car, it gives you that kind of weird sensation of a shunt back in your brake pedal, and it can unsettle the car a bit like when you brake overly heavily on a non-ABS assisted car. It can really unsettle a car. So these two-piece floating discs are really good for that. Also, having a two-piece rotor normally lowers the rotational mass, so it can keep the weight low. So you'll probably find that a two-piece rotor that's say 360mm can be much lighter than a full normal rotor that's 330mm. The weight is kept really minimal, and there's a lot less rotational mass. So very beneficial to get a floating caliper, a two-piece disc, should I say, not a caliper, a two-piece floating disc. EBC do them in their kits now. Like I say, you're going to get lower rotational weight and also unsprung mass, as well as better for maintenance, potentially cheaper costs thereafter, and also the kickback that you do get from normal rotor you won't get with the floating disc. So really, really good. A little bit more money typically, or can be a little bit more money in the initially when you buy a kit, but normally the rotors are either the same price or sometimes a little bit less. But they're much higher quality, way better, and completely outperform a normal one-piece disc. So well worth looking into as well. And like I said, again, the clamp, the brake force is dictated by a brake pad and a disc and the quality of caliper you've got on there. The more pistons you have in the caliper sometimes essentially give you a bit more brake force, but there is a little bit more science to that sometimes, and it's also to do with caliper design as well, and that's why again I like the EBC stuff, and it's very clever billet one-piece machined parts from the caliper, which stop flex and movement in the caliper, which does happen as well with probably some lightweight or lower end bits of kit that are out there actually. They can flex under extreme temperatures and under extreme conditions, so when they're being really worked hard, they can distort and twist and shift a little bit. What that typically leads to is actually normally uneven pad wear. So you'll probably see that you'll get a large amount of pad life left on one side of the caliper, and then on the other side of the caliper you'll get a lot less or a lot more wear, so you'll get a really uneven pad wear. That's never ideal because it means you end up having to change them or rotate them. That's not ideal. You want to try and have the wearing ideally together, and with a good caliper design you'll notice that you will get that more efficiently with a good quality kit. Going on to some a little bit more advanced things as well, you'll probably see again when you're watching Top Gear or the Grand Tour, you will see that some really expensive cars start to have ceramic or carbon ceramic brake options out the factory. And what that is essentially, it's just a disc that is, and sometimes a pad as well, which operates at a much higher tolerance in braking, friction and heat. And because of that, you can really lean on that car a lot more. So typically speaking, carbon ceramic brakes do take a little bit more heat in before they get up to a good operational temp. Once you get them up to an operational temp, they just hit like a sledgehammer, and they're very efficient and incredibly strong. Obviously, the downside to a product like that is just sheer cost, very expensive. There are manufacturers that are starting to give carbon ceramic options now in the disc and pad, and I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that EBC will do in the future if it's not something that they're doing now. I'll put some links in the bio to that's pretty much really it. If you've got any other questions, any advanced questions that I may or may not be able to answer, I'll certainly put them to maybe even the guys at EBC or anyone else I can think of. But yeah, if you've got any comments about anything we've talked about in the fundamental basics of a braking system, then yeah, please hit us up in the comment section. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and enjoyed the latest episode of PPR Tech Garage. Thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.